there is this idea sometimes that to be a tech entrepreneur, you need to be a tech person and you need to have been knowledgeable about tech. I'm actually not sure that's true. I think, what makes a marketplace for a specific vertical work very well is usually because you have a deep understanding on that marketplace. You know how it's happening offline, and you see an opportunity to make it more efficient digitally. And so where I've seen the most success is, people with a deep domain expertise, people that do want at the same time, even though they're non-technical initially, to get deep in the product and really build it and think about, having a lot of empathy for their users. It often comes back to the domain expertise and knowing who you're building for.
Hello and welcome to the Exponential Scale Podcast, the show where we talk about how tiny teams with big ambitions are doing more with less, scaling smarter, not harder, and building big businesses with teams that can fit around a dinner table. I'm your host, Ron Schmelzer, and on today's episode, we're talking with Emmanuel Straschnov, who is the CEO and co-founder of Bubble.io. Hi, Emmanuel. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I've been following the Bubble story for a while, and I was a Bubble user for quite some time. I built one of like a CRM application on Bubble in 2015, I think it was.
So very early on, actually.
Yes, back when I think when loops were working, but something else mental wasn't. But it was good. It was good to make something work. Even though I'm a coder, there's times when you just don't want to code. So Bubble was very helpful in that. And actually, maybe that's a good way to get started here. So, Bubble, for those of you that are not familiar, they're like the OG of low-code and no-code app development. And what does that even mean if you're hearing that for the first time, which I'm surprised if you are, but that's okay. Many people do hear these terms for the first time. For most of human history, if you had an idea for a software product, you had basically three options. One, learn to code. Two, hire somebody who knew how to code. Or three, kind of give up, because that really was it. The cost of entry to building software was engineering teams, six-figure runways, and at least 2 years before you had anything worth showing anyone. But then things really started changing. A couple of guys in New York decided that the whole system was broken, and that required people not learning some arcane language just to bring their ideas to life. But they spent 7 years with the beginning with no outside capital really providing a solution. And so today, one person with a laptop and a Bubble account can build a SaaS product, launch it, charge real customers, and scale it to millions in revenue. And we'll hear a little bit about that in this episode without writing a single line of code. And that's not a hypothetical. It's happening right now, thousands of times over, and on the platform my guest built. So we're now in this era now, if you've been following along in the story of AI, which continues to rapidly emerge, where people talk about single prompt vibe coding, and that might sound like a bit of we've been here, done that, but it's really not that easy. So this is the leverage first angle I want, and I want to get the perspective of our guest who's been in this space for longer than, pretty much any vibe coder in this space. So I want you to hold in your head this conversation. What Bubble unlocked isn't just easier software. It's the elimination of an entire category of headcount from the founding equation. You don't need a CTO, no dev team, no 18-month runway before you ship. And that's what we call scale maxing at the infrastructure level. And it's exactly what our guest has been building for 14 years. So really want to welcome you. So Emmanuel, thank you so much for sharing your insights with our audience.
Yeah, again, thank you very much. That was a great summary, actually, I think, of what we've been doing for a decade now.
Well, that's fantastic. And, we'll provide some stats as well. But maybe let's start with your introduction. Tell us, what was the spark that may suggest that I need to focus on this area of low code, no code, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of your success that you've had to date.
Yeah. So as you said, 14 years, we started in 2012. We didn't start the company thinking, when I say we, it's Josh and I, and it was just the two of us for actually quite some time, because we bootstrapped and auto-financed the business for a few years before raising money. So when we started back in 2012, the goal was not, hey, let's start a no-code platform, a no-code tool. But we really started from like a business, and I could almost say like a social problem that we were seeing, and our social mission is something that is still very important for us as a business, as a company. And the problem was that there were, back in 2012, in New York in particular, where we started, but it was everywhere in the world, but in New York in particular, something about, I need a CTO to build my startup. That was the beginning of the startup era. Facebook was about to go public. that was really the beginning of people feeling like there was an opportunity to take some problems and move them to the digital space, and get more efficiency that way. And so obvious examples, Airbnb, like, being able to having someone in your house and paying a fee was something that existed before. Airbnb made it a bed and breakfast, right? But Airbnb moved that online and therefore was able to create a new category. And the problem that we were seeing that was both business and social is that it was very expensive to build a product, in particular in New York, where you had a lot of domain experts, but that didn't have the technical skills. And the reason I'm saying it was a social problem is that we felt like the tech space was being closed to people that hadn't been fortunate enough to be exposed to code as young kids. And you had two ways to be exposed to as young kids. One was, your parents give you a book, because back then it was more books, about programming, or one of your parents was a programmer and therefore they taught you as a kid, or your best friend from high school, because randomly on the first day of school, you sat next to someone was a technical person. And therefore, when you had an idea 10 years later, you could go to that friend to be your CTO or your technical co-founder. And we felt it was just very unfair. And so the initial idea sparked for the business, like, look, we have this crowd of people that are smart, they're driven, they're hardworking, they want to start a business, they're as motivated as it gets. And they struggle because they just haven't been exposed to code, but they're really they have the product vision. They know what they want to create here. They just don't know how to write the different if then else and the commas and everything in the code. And we're like, there has to be a way for these people to build the products themselves. And so that's eventually became what, as you said, like the OG of no code. But so effectively what it is, it's a graphic interface where people can build complicated products. It's important to keep that in mind, because back in 2012 you could build websites, but we're not talking about websites, it's really web applications. So in the same sense that Airbnb.com or Facebook.com are web applications, not just websites, right? And you can do that after some learning, but it takes a few hours to learn. It has nothing to do with learning how to code. And then we host everything on our platform, because the vision is, if you can build your product without code, you shouldn't have to deal with DevOps and servers and everything. And so everything is batteries included.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. Well, you may be hearing that Emmanuel also has an accent because he studied in Paris as well as Harvard.
Well, and I'm French, actually.
And he's French. There you go. So didn't just move there for the school, and Harvard Business School. And you heard a little bit about its founder, right? It started in 2012 with Josh Haas. And what followed, just to give you an idea kind of how this has progressed, where are we now? After, it's with 7 years of bootstrapping, they did raise around 100 million Series A in 2021. But now they have over 5 million registered users, and companies that have started on Bubble have generated over $1 billion in revenue. And the team
just last year.
Oh, that's even better. So $1 billion just in the last year in 2025.
That's right. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
That's actually the metric I'm the proudest of, because this is our goal is really to unlock opportunities and unlock economic value for some people that didn't have access to company creation and application creation in the past. And so this $1 billion of revenue is a very good metric to highlight this.
Yeah, and that'd be great to like even figure out, like, of those people who are joining the billion, like what patterns are you seeing? Like, who are the ones who are having the most success? Maybe what kinds of applications are you seeing really, gaining the most traction? Maybe provide some insights, if you can, into that market.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to tell because we have millions of applications running. But in general, what I've seen people working the best is back to the origin story I was sharing a minute ago, is really people with a deep domain expertise, not necessarily coming from the tech space, actually. I think there is this idea sometimes that to be a tech entrepreneur, you need to be a tech person and you need to have been knowledgeable about tech. I'm actually not sure that's true. I think, what makes a marketplace for a specific vertical work very well is usually because you have a deep understanding on that marketplace. You know how it's happening offline, and you see an opportunity to make it more efficient digitally. And so where I've seen the most success is, people with a deep domain expertise, people that do want, at the same time, even though they're non-technical initially, to get deep in the product and really build it and think about, having a lot of empathy for their users. It often comes back to the domain expertise and knowing who you're building for. And then one of the things that is pretty special about Bubble is that it's extremely global. I think we have paying users in virtually every country of the world. And we've seen tremendous growth in some countries that you would not expect. Like Brazil, for instance, is a country where we see a ton of traction. Japan, Indonesia, France, and UK. Of course, the US is our biggest country, but it's not like 80% of our revenue because we have people a little bit everywhere. And so it's been great to see how, economically different regions have different growth and different type of businesses being built on them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, as you mentioned, over 5 million registered users. So there's lots of apps on the platform. Do you have like any examples of like some which were maybe even some surprising ones were like, oh, this app is really much more successful than you might have expected, or maybe the kinds of apps like are these e-commerce apps or these more marketplace networking style? Yeah.
It's more marketplace and SaaS than e-commerce because usually Bubble is very powerful and you can do e-commerce stuff with platforms that has less powerful, like a Shopify is usually enough, for instance. An example, one of the apps that is going the fastest in Brazil, I was talking about Brazil a minute ago, is some kind of StubHub competitor, but for Brazil, where you can buy tickets to events and ensure everything tickets are real, like it manage the payment and everything. They've been growing very quickly. Another example in Brazil is it's more B2B, but someone that created kind of a CRM/backend for real estate agencies. And so growing extremely quickly. That's one of our larger customer. We have one in Southeast Asia that has built the equivalent of Uber Eats in Malaysia, and that has worked extremely well. And where we are, we can see how their server usage goes, right? Because we host everything, and they've had like very impressive growth actually over the last couple of years with an extremely small team. It's two guys building the entire technology. Of course, they have a lot of people for the food delivery. It's a marketplace, right? For the actual deliveries, but for the software building part, it's much smaller than that. So applications tend to be more like customer facing. That's where we shine usually, even though some people build internal tools. In practice, the examples that we talk more about and that we see more are the ones that have traction and grow quickly. They tend to be customer facing, like startups and not internal tools.
Yeah. For a long time, low code, no code movement was really aimed at the internal developers. I remember the days of, was it FileMaker Pro?
Yeah, FileMaker Pro in many ways is ancestor to what we do, but it was for internal tooling, which we think is not the right. I mean, it is an interesting use case, but it's not the most exciting use case.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's still is FileMaker Pro still around? It might be. I'm not sure.
It's been acquired by Apple, right? But I don't know if Apple keeps you running it.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see how they would emerge in these days. But yeah, so much of that's missing because when you're running internally, you don't have to worry about large scale. You don't have to worry about.
You don't need to worry about large scale, and you also don't need to worry about UX because for internal tooling, given that you pay as a business owner, you pay your employees to work, you can actually give them not great software because they're being paid to use it. If you're building a startup, people are supposed to pay you to use your software. It's a very different dynamic, and therefore you need a much better UX. That's why I think what we do with Bubble customer facing is actually harder. But if you do that well, then you've created something great.
Yeah. So let's talk about your earlier years, those first 7 years as you were growing. Maybe you can provide some insight. How did you figure out who your initial target audience was, your ideal customer profile, and were you focusing on certain kinds of specific applications? Or I'm kind of curious as to that growth path over those first 7 years.
Yeah, so I described how we came to the idea, and I don't know whether we were smart or not smart. I mean, obviously, after 10 years or 15 years, it worked out okay, but that was pretty risky. We never did actually like a very thorough market ICP, like ideal customer profile validation. We said we have these people that want to start companies and looking for CTOs and they cannot find them. They're smart and driven. We're building for them. Well, that's the people we're building for. We never tried to figure out exactly how many people like that were in the world. Where we had to refine our ICP a little bit was how tech savvy did we want them to be? And we wanted to go with people that, even though they had never had written code in their life, we wanted them to be somewhat having some general understanding of what an API is, for instance. If they need to use payment, they're going to have to use Stripe, and we want them to understand how APIs play in this whole like tech world. So that's how we've been refining our ICP a little bit. But yeah, definitely yet small, and today still the same thing, like small business owners, people building a product for an existing business or a new venture. Over the years, it has expanded with a little bit more designers or like more engineers, but we started pretty clearly not for engineers. I think one of the things, so often being asked, a big ask, what was one decision you made in the early years of the business that actually turned out to be right and without which you would have probably not made it as a business? I think the fact that we decided to focus on non-technical people was very important because if you have engineers on your platform, they tend to push for more like coding-like features, and we didn't want to do that. And then when it comes to specific verticals or like use cases, not really, because by definition, we were dealing with entrepreneurs. So it's sort of the place what they want to do. I would argue that it's all more or less the same thing in a sense that a marketplace, whether it's a marketplace to sell cars, to rent apartments, it's the same backend and same flows. Just on one case, you upload pictures of cars, on the other one, you upload pictures of apartments. But fundamentally, at a technical level, it's pretty much the same thing. So the vertical we would go for was this type of web applications, marketplaces, social networks, or SaaS products like that, where it does some automation for you and you pay on a recurring basis. But we never really went specifically for one industry because it wouldn't work with the persona we were going for.
That's interesting. Well, that sounds good. Well, actually, in many ways, that ICP was focused on the entrepreneur, which is, you might think of as a broad community, but I was in that startup scene myself, ran something called Tech Breakfast, which was a morning demo event series in New York, actually.
Well, you probably have had some bubble startups on that.
Yeah, I am sure that might even been how I found out about it, because Tech Breakfast started in 2011 and ran through until the pandemic, and then it was very difficult to do any sort of in-person event. But that's actually a good transition point, because at around that time, just a little bit later, you raised a fairly significant round. So maybe you can provide some insight into that, because for a while you were bootstrapped. I think revenue was cranking really well for you. You had a small team. I don't know what the size of the team was in the early phases. Now you're about 130. So maybe talk a little bit about that decision and how has that changed your strategy, your growth strategy, anything that you're doing in terms of the markets, which are starting to heat up for sure.
Yeah. So just to give a few facts first. Yeah, we had a small team till something like late 2019, 18, when we raised our first round. I think we had like 12 people at that point. Then we raised our first round that was not 100 million, that was more like 6-something million. And then we got to maybe 50 people. And the second round, when we raised 100 million in 2021, the team was 50 people. And so it was a big change for us because we went for like just being the two of us for 5 years. Then we built a team on an organic, almost like a small business. Every quarter you had 1 or 2 people to get to 12. And then the first round and the second round, of course, then you can start having much more money and much more resources to hire more people. The thinking process was for the first few years, we were pretty clear in our mind that it was not right for us to raise money because the product was not ready to scale quickly. The challenge that we have and it's something pretty specific to what we do. For a lot of other ventures, that may not be the case, but for us, we needed people to be able to learn the products themselves, build the product and launch what they needed to launch, and be able to offer a wide spectrum of functionality. And because people wanted to build exactly the product they had in mind. And just doing that takes a long time. It takes like a few years, I think. It doesn't take 6 to 9 months. And I think raising money is dangerous because if you raise money, you put yourself on the clock, and within 18 months or 2 years, usually you have to raise another round. And then the next round usually have to show some metrics. And so we didn't have confidence that had we raised money in 2013, we would have been able to have the product good enough by 2015 to have this expensive growth. What happened in 2019 and then 2021 even more is that at that point, the product was ready for that. And we felt that now it was a time we could actually get users much faster, have them independently use a product and start seeing the growth that was necessary to raise a subsequent round, which did work out between 2019 and 2021, right? Because that's led to this large Series A. What did it change? It's definitely a very different way to run a business because you end up spending more money than you make. While before that, we would spend less money than we make, right? So we had to be profitable or breaking even. So that's the main difference. Culturally, that leads to some interesting things. You naturally will move into a little bit of more aggressive culture as a business because you start we also had big goals. Like our goal was always to be one of the big tech companies in the world. But the truth is, when you bootstrap, you're going to add 1 or 2 people per quarter. When you raise a lot of money, you're going to have 10, 20 people a quarter sometimes. Like we had some very aggressive hiring quarters and some slower ones. And so it changes the culture. The truth is not everyone liked it. And so you have to change a little bit some people sometimes because you need the culture. I don't know if we'll talk about culture in this conversation, but I really think that's what can make or break a business, the startup in particular. And fundraising and raising large rounds of money will definitely impact the culture that you'll have and that you'll need to win. And not everyone was on board after the first round.
Yeah, that's actually a good conversation point because there is this tension, especially now, especially given the focus of this podcast where people are intentionally trying to stay small. So, and when you hear things like, oh, you raise money and that changes the dynamics of profitability versus growth, we actually interviewed somebody else about that recently where he was talking about like, well, you have to usually make a trade-off between profitability and growth. If you choose profitability, then, you have to choose this more sustainable and slower growth, but then you may end up losing your market because somebody else may be investing in being more aggressive. So it's kind of interesting, I think, for our listeners who are thinking, wait a second, can't I scale as a small shop to possibly even challenge some of the big incumbents and be a billion-dollar company? That's the promise. And therefore, why would I need to raise? And if I do raise, then I wouldn't be changing my team size. So I would be using the money for something else. So there's a lot of sort of thoughts around this when it comes to team size and money.
Yep, definitely. Yeah.
So what are your thoughts there? I mean, would you say to someone like, is it possible? Is this
to get to $1 billion with a very small team?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, tools are changing right now. And I think artificial intelligence and this new thing of having AI not just respond to your questions, but being able to do proactively some things like through agents is definitely going to help, people scale businesses with less people. And we already are seeing this. I mean, like one of the metrics that SaaS company will track is AR per employee, and that has gone up quite a lot over time, right? So I think it's kind of the nature of technology as a larger concept, not just AI, but AI is just one new thing in tech right now. But if you look over the last hundreds of years, you can do more and more things with less human resources, like less people. At some point, the risk becomes, and for a business like us, that was a real thing when it was just the two of us, because it was just the two of us for a few years, like a couple of 5 years. You don't want to have too many key people because I think what's very important for an organization is to survive if someone leaves, right? And if you just have two founders and they run the whole thing, one founder disappears, gets hit by a bus, what happens, right? And so that's why I think building redundancy in a business is actually quite important. And that's where you need to scale a little bit the number of people, but definitely less so than you would have 5 years ago, that would have 10 years ago. And by the way, Bubble was part of this. Before, if you build a startup without Bubble back in 2015, you would need 10 people in engineering team to do something, 10% engineering team to do something. With Bubble, you probably could do that with one or two bubblers, right? So it's already, and that trend is accelerating right now.
Okay.
So yeah, we probably will see. I don't know if one-person company doing $1 billion is a realistic thing, because I think, again, the problem here is, do we want a business that is that scale with one key person that if they get hit by a bus, what happens, right? But definitely revenue per employee keep going up.
Yeah. And so that means that, if you do raise money, what would that funding be used for? And there's a lot of ways of growing that don't necessarily need headcount, but that are around market acquisition. Well, you did bring up AI. I was going to talk about that a little bit later, but this might be a good point now. And I guess from your perspective, from your philosophy, given that you're in this space where you're helping organizations who don't have small companies that don't have CTOs, that don't have technical people, realize their technical vision, are you finding AI to be something that is augmentative, helping you, accelerating your growth path, or are you finding it to be eroding or eating in or cannibalizing the market from some perspectives? Folks who are like, I'm just going to throw a bunch of stuff into a tool, into a vibe coding tool, or one of these AI coding things, and I will get something out the other end, and I wouldn't even need to use any sort of low code or no code tool. So I'm sure you're feeling it on both sides.
Yeah, definitely both sides. I'll start by saying that the AI promise, which is AI is many different forms, but the latest wave with large language models, this idea that you can use natural language with a computer, and the computer can understand whatever that means behind the scene, right? What you need and what you want, even though you didn't speak in a particular structured way, is a fantastic piece of technology, first of all, and something extremely aligned with what we do with Bubble. And I think no code in general. The whole thing with mobile, no code and Bubble in particular was to expose something that you could use with your mouse and clicking that could read in natural language. When you have a workflow, it reads, the button, the user clicks on this button. First, you do something, then you send an email, then, right, you could read it that way. So we're already getting closer to what people can do with LLMs today. And to be blunt, to be honest, I wish this technology were ready back in 2012 because that would have made a lot of things easier for us. It was not, and we started in 2012. So now the question is integrating that in our product is very exciting because we now have some tool that can make our product significantly better. And that's what the team is actively working on. Is it also a competition? Yes. The way it's a competition is, for the first maybe 7 or 8 years of the business, people would often ask me, sometimes reporters, sometimes investors, who is your competition? Like it's usually a question people ask because they want to understand how you fit in the overall landscape. And I would tell people, frankly, no one is really trying to do what we do. The real competition we see is code. Is that if someone leaves Bubble, well, then, or if someone doesn't want to use Bubble, they need to hire a software development company, firm, or find a CTO or a technical co-founder to build their product. So essentially that was code. And where the vibe coding, emergence of vibe coding tools has AI more generally has had an impact on us is that has made code cheaper to produce. And so code is, in some ways, I would say code is tracking back as a competitor for us. So now we have two views of the world. I mean, there is vibe coding tools and us, and I think we are the only one with this contrarian view. Similarly to us in 2012, the only one with a view that code, and I still feel very strongly that code is not the right way to describe most applications. If you're building something like Airbnb, you think about apartments, you think about booking, you think about reviews, you think about charging a credit card. You do not think in terms of commas, if, then, else, while, for loops, this kind of like obscure concepts that are really fun for people. And I'm one of them that write code, but really it shouldn't be what people think about when they build applications. And so we're now in a place where we are kind of the only one thinking that. And so we think that the right way to build application is something, it's a high level of abstraction that happens to be visual, and that's Bubble. Supercharged with AI because AI allows us to make our product so much more enjoyable to use because there are some tedious things you don't want to do. You can just do that for me and we do that for you automatically. The other guys, the vibe coding tools, think that, code is the best thing in the world. It's usually engineers building for engineers, by the way. So I think there is a little bit of a bias there. And AI can basically, similarly to what it does for us, produce code faster when it's annoying to write some algorithms or test or like debug or stuff like that. So this is what the market looks like today. We'll see what happens in the future. I feel pretty strongly that I can't imagine us being like having this conversation in 50 years. I hope we'll still be around and still think that if then else is the right way to build an application. So I think our view is the right one to build applications supercharged with AI. But we find out because on the flip side, vibe coding tools are iterating on their product very quickly because AI is making a lot of progress.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, having used all these tools, because I'm one of those, like, I love to program, but I love to use all the tools. I think it's hard for me to think like a non-developer, like a non-technical person. But from what I've seen, the commentary, it's a lot of black box thinking, which is that they've put some text prompt in, something great comes out, but what's in the middle is a bit of a mystery for a lot of the vibe coders. And I think one of the things I really did enjoy and have enjoyed with Bubble is that, well, your application is visual. You can see it. You can make the changes to it. It's not like some lines of, TypeScript or Python that you would have to try to have the system use another set of words to have it reconfigure, right?
Right, because you just said, what's the output of the vibe coding tool is great. I'm not sure that's always true, actually. It rarely does exactly what you want. And so sometimes you're going to have to tweak it. And then the tweaking part, it's difficult that if it's code. There is another fundamental thing, personally, that the reason why I think right now the industry tends to write off graphic user interfaces because it feels like it's the old world. It feels like, it's Windows, Macintosh, Bubble in some ways because we have these GUIs. We have this GUI that people can use. And there is a little bit of this fascination right now for, you can just type something and the computer, speak to the computer and do something. I feel quite strongly that we'll come back to that. There's a little bit of a media thing right now because I don't think a prompt and just typing something in English is always the best way to do things. Frankly, if a button is not in the right place on the page and the color is not right, isn't it easier to use your mouse or your finger if it's a tablet, drag it, change the color, and be done with it, instead of going and literally telling an AI, you see this button on the left of this other button, I would like to move it, and by the way, change the color. Like, come on.
Yeah. And I've told you this 3 times already.
So I think there is something that people tend to, and it's a little bit of a media frenzy thing, because there is this magical feel with the ChatGPT, Claudes, and other models that people have and react to, and it's really fair, that we think that it's just now about chatbots and talking. I don't think that's true. I think, again, graphic user interfaces are very valuable, and what the best is to combine both.
Yeah. We've interviewed on the Exponential Scale podcast the CEO of Zapier, Wade Foster, and the CEO of Make, Fabian Veit. And it's funny because it's a lot of the same conversation. Yeah, they're like, there are some things that are probabilistic, where you type in, you get like your creative design, and there's some things that are just deterministic, that you want it to happen the same way each and every time. And the best way to handle a deterministic problem is with a deterministic tool. It's like if a flow happens A, then B, then C, and you want to change C to B, just change C to B. Right. So it's very consistent. And I do think that we will come back to it. But we have a lot of non-technical people in the world who are building technical things and have to come to that realization, I think, sometimes. Well, swing on a little bit, because this is a great conversation on AI. And for all of you who wanted to dig deeper, I really encourage you to take a look at the Bubble tool and see what people are building, because that's where we're coming down to here, which is that what our listeners want to know is, how can I build something that scales? How can I make something work? And Bubble's one of those tools that can really help me, platforms that can really help me get there. So talk about, I think, one of the challenges now that most organizations have, let's put the building part aside, which is getting easier and easier every day. Well, because building is getting easier and easier every day, getting attention is getting much harder, because you can create things and you can publish them and you can get. So how are you seeing some of the folks breaking through and saying, I built something, pay attention, use it, get the customers. And of course, the customers have so little loyalty these days because it's so easy to switch from one thing to the next. Kind of, what are you seeing some of the patterns of folks who are successfully able to get attention and keep their customers?
Look, I'm not an expert at growth, and I think a lot of people could have a more educated and informed perspectives on this. What I've seen work the best, whether it's my space, when I look at what we do and what our peers do, or what our users do, is like social validation. I think right now there is so much, it's so easy, as you're saying, to get out there. Now with AI, it's so easy to be very vocal on social media, because you can actually automate a lot of this with text production and image production through AI, that people like becoming a little bit, hermetic to this, like, oh yeah, another post, right? And what works still is that if one of your friends or someone you respect, not necessarily a friend, but someone you know of, telling you, oh, I tried this tool and this is working great, then you're going to start paying much more attention. Or in our case, we call that internally like radical customer marketing, a success story. When a business in Southeast Asia has reached that certain scale, and we ask our users if we can share, some numbers about their business before we talk about them, but then putting those numbers out there, say, hey, this is what the non-technical person has built. So this is something that is actually working usually much, much, much better. And so I've seen the same with our users. So people who are able to actually mobilize their user base and get them to talk about their product in a genuine way. I mean, what doesn't work is just say, hey, you get an affiliate revenue and share a link with your friends and get some money. People have done that so much now that it's not genuine. When it's genuine is when people are like truly excited about a product and are excited enough about a product that just want to tell people about it. That's when you start having like real virality. That's something that turned out very good for us. One thing I'm very proud of what we've done with Bubble is the level of emotional connection people have with the product and the rest of the community. Like people self-identify as bubblers, for instance. And it's a blessing and a curse, by the way, because emotions can go both ways, and sometimes it goes south and difficult, and it can lead to difficult situations for us as a company to manage. But overall, it's a net win, because this emotional bound that people have with the product is what makes them excited enough to talk about it and then get a lot of people on the platform.
Yeah, I agree. We just interviewed Gina Bianchini, who is the CEO of Mighty Networks. It's interesting how community is making this big return. One, because of authenticity. People want to hear authentic voices because it's so easy now to have ChatGPT speak for you, and it sounds like everybody else. So
Right.
authenticity matters, and of course trust. People are having a harder and harder time trusting other people and organizations and government institutions. So trust is
Right.
becoming a big part of it. So it sounds like we're coming down to it. And yeah, having a passionate community can always run both ways. But it's good to have a passionate community than not one at all. So that's really valuable. So I'll keep an eye on that. And I think maybe, as part of our show notes, we'll link to anything you want to share with us about your community, opportunities for people to hear from other bubblers and what they're doing. Happy to share that with our audience.
Yep.
So we're on to our rapid fire here, keeping an eye on the time here for my guest and also for our listeners. So we always ask the same three questions for insights and tips on what's working for you that may work for our listeners as well. And the first one is tools. What is one tool or automation? Doesn't have to be AI, just something that you are using for yourself personally or for your organization that you absolutely can't run your business without. The one that gives you or your team the 10x leverage every single week.
I'm pausing because there are many tools I've been using for many years, but over the last couple of months, I've been building pretty heavily my own agent to automate a lot of things. So I think I'll use that. I'm currently in a phase where whenever I find myself doing something repetitive, I find a way to automate it through AI. So what I'm using is OpenClaw, like what people use a lot, even though I think you could probably do that directly with Claude at this point, but it's doing pretty much the same thing, where it's managing a lot of the, again, tedious things. So I literally have like a little notepad next to me, like I'm at old school. And when I find myself doing something and I'm like, wait, how am I doing this? Like this should be something that I can do automatically. Then I figure out a way to get my little. I gave this agent a little name to get this person.
I'm curious what the name is.
That one I keep that to myself. But
Okay.
and that has like really not only it makes me more efficient, but I'm also now doing some things better than I was not doing before.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets interesting. Just to give you an example, for instance, every day I have my agent will look at my calendar for the following day and look at all my one-on-ones. And so the instruction I've given this agent is look at all my interactions with my reports over the since the last one-on-one, and summarize the different, whether it's through email or Slack, or oral conversation if we happen to have a transcript, which sometimes we do. We don't do all the time because sometimes it's sensitive, but often we do, and come up with like the key points I should be checking on with this person. I was doing that before. I would prepare my one-on-one in the past, but not necessarily as thoroughly as I am doing now.
Yeah, that's something we talk about a lot, which is repeatable processes. Moving those and offloading those for automation is a huge win. It keeps you it also just allows you to do the same thing the same way so that you're not always reinventing the wheel.
Right.
Actually, it's a good segue because the next rapid fire question is about process. So the question is, what is one system or process that you think that every lean for a leverage first team should have in place by the time they hit the $1 million revenue mark that separates the grinders, the ones who are just constantly working hard to make that first million, therefore they're going to work twice as hard to make that second million, separates those grinders from the scalers. Maybe something from your experience you should say, hey, stop doing that, or maybe something that should start doing today.
A process, you mean?
Yeah, or like a method or some approach or just something that you learned that you're like, hey, if I want to really grow, I should probably stop doing this, or I should maybe if you want to grow, you should start doing this.
Yeah, it's not a process, it's a delegation thing. It's delegating. When I think about the bubble trajectory, as I said earlier, it was just the two of us for 5 years, and it was a mistake. We went too long for just the two of us for 5 years. And the reason it was a mistake is because there were some things, and we were beyond 1 million of revenue actually at that point when it was just the two of us. And I found myself just keeping doing the same thing because it had to be done, and I should have found another way. Back then it was people. Today maybe it would be an agent. I don't know, to delegate things to something else so that you can free your mind. Whenever you start repeating something the same thing 4 times, it's a time to think about a different approach.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's consistent with our last one. I thought it was because you're heading in that same direction, which is great. And then I guess just really the final rapid fire is, I know you've provided a lot of advice and tips and guidance here, but maybe what's one piece of advice you'd give to a founder who's running that small dinner table sized team right now who wants to scale based on some of the things that you've seen work for your community?
I'm going to give something a little bit contrarian, and I'm actually stealing that from Paul Graham from YC. Is do things that don't scale. Like he wrote a blog post about this. And as much as scaling is important, it's don't worry about scale too early, because I think if you worry about scaling too early, you're going to start seeing complications where there might not even be a problem in the first place. So it's a little bit the opposite of what I said, and it's about finding the right balance. At first, do things, repeat them a few times, and then when you find yourself repeating, then it's much easier to think about how to scale them. Don't worry about building a machine before you actually have even a product.
Well, that's great. That's actually a really good place to end here. It gave me a good note here for our mantra for the week, which I always give. So I want to thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you so much for joining us here in this podcast. You provided fantastic feedback and really going to take another look. I'm going to start playing more with Bubble again, and I encourage our listeners to do the same. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. That was a very fun conversation.
Yeah. So here's your mantra for the week. Don't optimize too early. Don't worry about things until you've built something that actually people care about. So stop waiting. The tools do exist. The leverage is there. You've heard there are companies that are $1 billion generated on the platform just in 2025 alone. That's pretty phenomenal. So your job is just to start. So if you loved this interview with Emmanuel Straschnov, I really want you to hit the subscribe button, leave a review, share with that founder friend who's been saying, I just need to find a technical co-founder for the last 3 years. So I really want them to listen to this podcast. So thank you very much for joining us on the Exponential Scale podcast. I want you to think big, stay lean, and scale smarter. Micro teams aren't the future, they're the now. If this episode got you fired up, hit that subscribe button, share it with your crew, and join the movement over at scalebrate.com. That's SCALEBRATE.com. Till next time, think big, stay lean, and scale smarter. Because you're not a tiny team, you're a micro team with mega potential. So get exponential, and thanks for tuning in to the Exponential Scale Podcast.